So let's do a real quick recap. What you should have read in chapter 2. Basically, we had where Paul describes his interests before he joined the war, and they were poetry and writing. He really enjoyed poetry and writing. He recalls, Paul recalls his time in training camp, and we find out that Kimrick dies, and Mueller does, in fact, get Kimrick's boots, those coveted boots. So we're going to move into you doing just a quick timeline, and it's far shorter than that timeline I had you do a couple weeks ago. You're going to basically plot the sequence of events that lead up to and immediately follow the enlistment of Paul and his friends. And then you're going to use this timeline to analyze the transition Paul and his friends make from just being students, everyday students, only worrying about the things like you guys do on a daily basis, to actually becoming soldiers. So before you start, and maybe to even help you start to figure out where the timeline about Paul and his friends would begin and then where it would end, I'm going to help you with that so that you can kind of go through and then find the information in between there. So if you're stuck, you should have it where your timeline is going to start where Paul and his friends are in school. And then the end of your timeline to this point of what we've read in the novel so far is that Kimrick dies and then Mueller gets his boots. So you should be able to find about 8 to 10 things, probably more like 10, between those two things that I've got. So total you should have about 11 or 12 things in between the beginning of them being at school and then up to Kimrick dies. So you can just do this timeline in your notebook. Probably the next day or so I'll have an official one on a bigger sheet, but I want you to have it in your notebook because you are, at the end of this, after you've constructed it, you're going to answer a couple questions just based on that information that you've collected. So in your notebook, come up with your timeline. And they can be bullet points. We're not looking at for dates, just the sequence of events. All right, now that you have constructed your timeline, I want you to look over it and tell me in your notebook, give me a couple sentences, what, based on the information that you have right there in your timeline, is the term Iron Youth an appropriate nickname for Paul and his friends? So now that you kind of looked at it, you have a little more understanding of Iron Youth, do you think that this is really what these boys should be called? Why or why not? All right, some discussion questions. I have some here I'm going to have you put in your notebook, and then I have a couple of like comprehension questions just on the first couple of chapters that I want you to do that's on a handout. But these, before you do the ones on the handout, I'm talking handout on a loose leaf paper, not your orange spiral. So I have 4. The first one is comradeship means friendship based on shared or group activities or interests. So why does the experience of the Iron Youth result in comradeship? How is the experience of the Iron Youth different than that of older men's experience? How do words like melancholy, embittered, and indifferent help you understand what life at war was like for the Iron Youth? And then summarize how the Iron Youth's perspective about life has changed since they enlisted. So make sure that these 4 are in your notebook. All right, handout 8A, which is in your orange spiral notebook. Before you do this, all I need you to do is to read the 2 columns, and then, so those paragraphs, and then answer the questions that follow, and then I'm going to tell you what to do next. Now that you've read and answered it, I want you to understand, before we move on, that the examples that are listed in that first column are organized by characters. And then the examples in the second column are organized by ideas. So really, the information that's in that second column, they're using a broad category. And then what I want to know is, why might it be important to organize writing using a broad category? So just kind of think about it, maybe jot down a note, but I want you to think about why sometimes it's okay to use broad categories versus very specific titles and labels. Some ideas would be that using broad categories, it gives us an opportunity to use a wide variety of evidence in our writing so that we aren't pinpointed. We can pull from all types of different things that kind of help with our evidence and support. It also allows us to see similarities and differences between our characters. Again, since we're not pinpointing or being very, very specific, those broad terms allow us to see a little bit more of what's similar and different. And then it also gives us a deeper understanding of our topic. I want to make sure that you understand that as we're moving through this, the whole this idea of organization of your information is important, because for you, it's important not only for you just in general to comprehend the novel and track development of the story, but these approaches are things that you're going to be using in your end of module task when we write an essay, and you're going to be using broad categories in your writing.